Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this town council meeting Tuesday, May the 27th, 2025 to order. Kim, if you'll please call roll.
Mr. Webb.
Here.
Ms. Quetch. Here. Ms. Fillion. Here. Vice Mayor Austin.
Present.
And Mayor Anderson.
Here. Now we need approval of the agenda. Someone can make a motion to approve the agenda today.
I'd make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Kim, if you'll please call roll.
Mr. Webb.
Aye.
Ms. Quetch. Aye. Ms. Pillion.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Austin.
Aye.
And Mayor Anderson.
Aye. We have no one signed up for public comments, so we are here today for the first reading of ordinance. The ordinance is for the Town Council of Abingdon proposing the budget to make appropriations for the current expense and to fix the tax rate upon the real and personal property for the financial year beginning July the 1st, 2025, and ending June the 30th, 2026. If Mike Cochran and Steve Troutman will please come forward.
Hey, good afternoon, council. How you doing?
Yes, sir.
You want to go to the summary real quick?
Sure.
Oh, that's summary,
Okay. Before you is the general fund budget for fiscal year 2026, as well as the sewer fund budget. On the general fund, the assumptions used in the revenue was the adopted real estate tax rate that y'all adopted a few months ago of 19 cents per 100 of value of real estate property, which was the equalization rate. As a result of that, we will decrease tax levies for real estate by a total of about $40,000. There was an adjustment made by the county on the last book, which resulted in additional revenue loss of $34,000. Lodging and meals tax rates remain unchanged. All other tax rates remain unchanged. Sales use, meals, and lodging tax, we're estimating a modest 5% increase next year over this year's actual. And this budget also assumes the use of $203,484 in general fund balance to balance the budget. On the expenditure side, there's a 2.9% COLA. It does implement a 10-year step for the police department, which had a net of $18,500 or a gross amount of $23,000. The gross meaning that it compensates for FICA, workers' comp, and unemployment taxes. So that's $23,000 is on the gross side. It also includes $70,000 for promotions and certifications spread out through a number of different departments. That grosses up to a little over $86,000. There's no increase in health premiums on personnel. There's no new full-time positions in this budget. $71,000 in additional part-time funding for firefighters to address 24-hour coverage at the fire department. There were reductions in department outlays of $252,000 that was taken out of the budget. There was also a reduction in non-VDOT paving projects of $350,000, so about $600,000 was removed from the operating budget in order to get down to a minimum use of the general fund. There's no funding for a capital improvement plan. We can talk about the capital improvement plan for the sewer budget when we get to that, but there's no CIP for the general fund. This does include $276,638 grant match expenditures, again, from the general fund. That's included in that 203. So if we're not for the grants, we would be adding to the general fund. It also includes $253,950 funding to the Barter, William King, and the Arts Commission. Again, so were it not for that, we'd be adding to the general fund. Were it not for the grant match, we'd be adding to the general fund. But compensating for all of those, we're using $203,484 of the general fund. On the personnel side, this compares to about a 5% increase between last year's adopted budget and this proposed budget. That again makes up the 2.9% COLA, the $71,000 additional for the firefighter part-time, which grosses up to 83, and the step increase for the police department. But again, no new positions. And that's pretty much it as far as the assumptions go.
Yeah, it's basically a reasonably lean budget. What we're trying to do is we're still waiting on the upper part of the trail to get under contract. Once that comes under contract, we expect to see some activity in the area, additional activity. And the analysis that we've been able to do on our just traffic counts and different types of analysis that we've done, we're still seeing increases in traffic and increases in activity on the road, which is good. And even though we're 6+ months now or 7 months past the storm, we're still seeing steady lodging, and we're not seeing big hits anywhere, which would normally expect. So basically, with some of these things at the 6-month mark, if we find that there's things that we need to get done and the revenues are good, then we can come back for a budget adjustment in order to make that happen. And then for those watching at home, I just want people to understand that in the way we operate, our council here does not receive health benefits. I know they do in some organizations, and I just want to make sure that was clear to those watching at home. But all in all, this is it's a decent budget, and we're able to pass along a decrease in actual real taxes to our citizens, which is unusual considering that inflation was 21% since the last appraisal. So we're delivering a real reduction.
And there was a slight correction from last week's reading on the adopted budget for 2025. There was an error in the number. It had been carried over $30,000 for promotions and certifications in the street department. That wasn't in the 2025 budget, but it had been reflected in the comparative chart here. So I've passed out in each of your locations a new sheet here, the summary, which will tie to the adopted budget of 2025. Also for all the departmentals and the personnel, that has been updated to correct that error. And the street department detail has been updated. If you look at the detail, you'll see an area that's highlighted in yellow. That's where the $30,000 certification number was there in error. There was no $30,000 last for this current fiscal year, so that's been removed. That being said, even removing that, the personnel budget this year versus 2025 adopted is about 5% increase.
No, and I give kudos to finance. If you ever watched how they put all this together, the amount of spreadsheets they operate is simply astounding. So, I appreciate everything they're able to do to make it happen.
There've been a lot of changes just in the budget process, so it's been a challenge.
Yeah, but I would anticipate that we'd be able to we'll have a decent year, and with the Highway 58 being reopened, I anticipate the upper part of the trail contract relatively soon. And once that happens, I think we should start seeing some additional activity in town related to that. There's going to be a lot of people in town for that, which should help with everything that we do. Y'all have any questions or anything specific?
I want to discuss just for a moment the scheduled overtime that we have included in this budget. It shows a percentage increase of 81%.
For Oh, so last year, it was in the regular overtime. It wasn't you're talking inside the police department?
I don't know what department
It-
necessarily,
It
just
just
said
says
Yeah.
scheduled overtime.
Yeah,
under
so,
overtime.
yeah, so last year, that was just part of the regular overtime line, but because so I broke it out separate because it is a scheduled item. It's not like regular overtime, which just comes from, late calls or whatever. Yeah, so but by breaking it out into scheduled overtime, because when you see overtime, I know a lot of times people say, oh, wow, well, why is there so much overtime? And by breaking it apart, you can see it's just part of how they operate, but that's why the increase, because last year it was included in the regular overtime.
But both of them has
They
increased.
both increased.
Both of them has.
Regular overtime up 19%.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where they've got
So
the,
even if you put it in
Scheduled
overtime.
overtime. There's the scheduled overtime. There's regular overtime for all departments. The only scheduled overtime you have, this is for the police
Yeah,
department
yeah.
only. right
oh, I'm looking
there.
at the wrong sheet. I'm looking at the green bar looking stuff. But yeah, that's, because like, if you go into the police tab or which should be you'll have a sheet under version 4 draft that's got the color stuff on it.
Yep.
But on the first page of that, you'll see if you go to 24 actuals and 24 appropriated, there was none identified. And so we created a separate account because you want to be able to track it better. And so by calling it scheduled versus regular overtime, it's just easy.
What page are you on, sir? With that?
If you go to the police tab in the budget book.
Oh, in the
Yeah,
budget
the
book.
very first page in the police tab in the budget book. And it's one of the color sheets. But it goes from, in previous years, it didn't exist. And so we broke it apart in order to better identify it.
But I still think it's above the regular overtime. We have that much more in overtime. Because we had an overtime column, we just didn't have a scheduled overtime column.
Correct, yeah.
But I do believe it's been created, a scheduled overtime.
It has been. And that was,
Yes.
if you'll notice on the 2025 adopted,
Uh,
when we did the amendment, when we separated it for this year, we went back and did an estimate of what it would have been in 2025 based on y'all's calculations of how many scheduled hours there were per person.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was just in overtime, not a
Correct.
scheduled overtime.
The original budget was just in overtime, and then we
Thank you.
separated based on the estimate so that you could see scheduled overtime versus.
But I
regular.
still, and correct me if
But it
I'm
is
wrong,
a-
I still think it's an increase.
Yes.
Even if you combine the two and call it all just
Yes, it is.
overtime combined,
Yes,
you know, it has increased that much.
And I think it was halfway through the year that y'all
Mhm. Yeah,
started doing had something to do with Fair Labor Standards Act or something.
yeah, so I wanted it identified because when you see a big item like that, when they're staffed, you shouldn't have as much use of overtime. And so by separating it, what he's looking at is the 46,000, which is, you have a slightly higher overtime, slightly higher pay scale. So the overtime would go up slightly off of that. I know the chief had sent, a couple meetings ago, had passed out a list of all the things that they do that are scheduled, or not scheduled overtime, but things where they get stuck with late transports and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, they do a pretty good job of monitoring it. And I think, I don't have their current,
Correct? The what now?
where they're at year to date. He's done a pretty good job of monitoring it, but.
Oh, I don't have that number. But the regular overtime was, like you say, for scheduled events, whether it be Plum Alley or any of the other events that they, need to provide coverage for. And that was a standard overtime, and they came up with an estimate of how many hours per week, on average per. And then y'all came up with the scheduled overtime was based on when they get in their car,
No.
because.
Yeah, so on their scheduled overtime, it's because they work 12-hour tours, so they work 168 hours a pay period instead of 160. And when you factor all that out, that's where the scheduled overtime, because,
4 hours per pay period or
Yeah.
something like that?
yeah, 4 hours a week. It's 4 hours per week, so it's, 8 hours per pay
4
period.
hours per, yeah.
Yeah.
4 hours.
And,
Each of you all are discussing the police department exclusively. Is that true for the overtime, scheduled overtime's 100% attributable to the police department?
Yes,
yeah, it's, yes, is the answer.
There is other overtime departments though,
yes.
yes. And this is a combination, when you see it out here, the total. It's all the departments.
All
which
the
you know.
departments on the first summary sheet.
Yeah,
correct.
it's 221 plus 185, so 400,000.
Yeah, I mean, like some departments, like Public Works and all, they'll have overtime. Most of their overtime comes in for, like, if they have call-outs for different things happen with signalization, stuff like that, or when storms happen.
And snow removal.
Yeah, when
things
storms
like
happen
that, yeah.
for the snow removal, they get paid for that as well. And that, that's, it's indeterminate as to how much overtime you're gonna get when it comes to the snow, because it all depends what kind of season you have. But all in, I mean, they do a pretty decent job of monitoring it to make sure it's not taken, make sure that, that everything is handled appropriately. I think this year we're estimated finishing the year roughly 100,000 under in personnel costs. I mean, they do a pretty good job of monitoring it. And, in that 100,000 under, we've still got reimbursed with FEMA, so it's actually slightly, we're performing slightly better than budget for the year, the current year, so.
Amanda, do you have any questions for
No,
I do not.
you're good.
Donna? Derek? Donna, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I'll probably have some remarks when I go to vote on June the 3rd, but, I don't support this budget.
You do not
I
support
do
it?
not support this budget.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Austin, do you have any questions?
I don't have any other additional questions. Ms. Quetch was pointing out a little bit earlier that since, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you told me since 2023 up until this budget, personnel costs were up
39%,
39%.
and overtime is up 132%.
And to me, that's just frightening. It's like a freight train coming down a mountain without any brakes.
Well, yeah, I don't know how to answer that other than to say we provide a heck of a lot of services.
I don't question that.
Yeah, we provide a lot of services, and we're not adding bodies to it, and so the ways that we get it done is we work our folks pretty hard, and they work very hard.
I don't
But-
question that.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just saying that
well,
there's got to
so
be a stopping point
for certain,
or a
for certain.
slowdown point.
Well, if you look at growth year over year, percentages are hard when you're talking about that, because part of that percentage includes an adjustment in the department for that receipt, the police in particular. There was an adjustment there, so that adjustment doesn't happen every year. That was in order to correct a market condition. And so that increase is not, if it was every single year, I'd say, yeah, that's crazy, but it's not every single year. That's why this year's growth is 5%, including the 2.9 COLA. And some of that is the extra fire personnel. So when it comes to actual growth, you can't include an adjustment. I mean, you can, but it's a one-time thing. It's not an annual thing.
Well,
So,
I believe since 2023 also was when we added the full-time people in the fire department, which carries, as full-time, it also carries benefits as well as retirement. And so that really grosses that number up quite a bit.
Well, I'll just throw these numbers out there. I mean, we've gone from the end of 2022 from 6.5 to right at $10 million. So that's how we get the
Budget to budget.
39% budget to budget, yeah. And I just don't think it's sustainable. I mean, I think at the rate we're going, the pace we're going, we're going to hit a wall. We've been blessed with extra monies to help do a lot of things around this town, and the town looks great. I mean, great. But that money's gonna run out.
Yeah.
So,
No, I appreciate that. We've added $4+ million to the fund balance in the years that you're talking about. So we've had good years, and we're doing everything we can in order to, in order to continue with putting our best foot forward all the time, which will add to the tourism, which will bring the revenues in. If you see where our revenues come from, the majority of it doesn't come from regular taxes. So I think the idea would be is that we continue doing what we're doing, and
well, the meals and lodging is only about 30% of our budget.
yeah, you get meals, lodging, and sales together is a pretty decent number.
It together is about 30%. And
But again, on the personnel, and I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but decisions have been made in the past for like the sports complex, which brought in additional revenue, but it also required personnel.
right,
And we didn't really know how much personnel that was going to require until it was actually operating. And so now you have additional personnel there, both full-time and part-time. We extended the hours at the Coombs Center for,
Sunday.
you know, for during the summer and other programs. That requires additional headcount, additional, albeit part-time, but it's still additional personnel. So it's not as if we're looking at a static number in 2023 versus today. If we had the exact same people in 2023 and the exact same people today, then that would certainly raise all kinds of alarms. But when you're adding programs and services which require additional personnel, then we either don't do those programs, or we adapt, or we add additional personnel as needed to support that. You know,
we were all
and
for, we've
candid-
all been all for the sports complex,
Hmm?
you know, from the get-go. We're, you know, all about the sports complex, and we realize it brings in some revenue.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just saying if you know, I don't have the analysis to go through and say, okay, exactly. You know, we can go back and look at what the COLAs have been over the last 4 years, which has been substantially less than what the overall inflation rate has been over the last 4 years, on average. Not to say that there hadn't been other market adjustments here, there, or elsewhere.
Perhaps.
But I'm just saying, it's, you know, to just pull one number out from 1 year versus the next year without seeing all of the underlying variables that went into both of those numbers, I'm just saying they're different. I'm not disagreeing that it's gone up.
Well,
The sustainability is a question. Again, go back and look at what our meals tax and lodging was in 2023 versus what it is today. That has increased as well.
So I have a question, and I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody's saying. I just want to make sure that, you know, I've said many, many times that I do not have a financial background, so I ask these questions solely for my own understanding. I want to make sure that I understand everything exactly the way it is. So what we're saying here is that we have a balanced budget. We aren't spending any more money than we are bringing in, correct?
Correct.
So our budget is balanced. So if next year something happens, like what happened in 2020 or otherwise, and we find that we're bringing in less money, then we would have to make cutbacks in order to have a balanced budget, right? So in that case, what we have now is not sustainable, but we could make adjustments to make sure that we had a balanced budget next year or 5 years from now or whatever, if we needed to bring it back in line, correct?
we would have no choice unless we raise taxes.
Right,
Raise
of
taxes.
course. And
Yeah,
I
we would
will,
have no
I will never
choice.
vote. I mean, I won't say never, but I've said this before. I am largely opposed to raising taxes on our constituents. That's not something I really have an appetite for. But that being said, even though what we're spending has increased, we still have a balanced budget. And we have added to our general fund. So our general fund is larger than it was, say, when I came on council in 2020. We have more money in the general fund. So we're doing better there. But I've said this before too. I don't feel like our goal as a council is to, I mean, we saved the money in the general fund that our financial advisors have asked us to save in order to keep our bond rating and in order to save for a rainy day. And we're not using any of our extra general fund money, but our purpose as a council, I don't feel, is to collect taxes and save them. I feel like our purpose as a council is to take the money that we have brought in and use it to the betterment of our town. And I'm okay with this budget as it is, simply because it is balanced and we are spending exactly the amount of money that we are bringing in. I do have concerns about the sustainability, but I also understand, which is why I asked that question. The way I understand it is, if we get to a point that it's not sustainable, I mean, if another pandemic happens, we aren't going to be providing all of these services, so our budget would shrink and our revenues would shrink and our expenditures would shrink. So I feel like it's a little bit of a static situation. And so I'm okay with things right now because you have done what I asked you to do, which was give us a balanced budget without increasing our tax burden on our constituents. And I can't think of a single time in the time that I've been on council that we haven't had some sort of planned general fund expenditure in our budget. And this year we don't. And I feel like I don't know how you did it.
We do have 203,000.
203,000.
But those are all for capital projects.
No,
For the
we're-
grant match.
Yeah.
It's all grant
It's for the
matches.
grant match.
And so it's like, I asked that question last time. If we have money in the general fund in excess, if we have saved money, if we have put extra money aside, then I feel like that extra money that we've put aside this year needs to be spent on capital projects next year, because that's what people pay taxes for.
Well, now,
Grants.
let me point something out here. They first came to us with a budget with a tax increase, okay? And 600 and some thousand, okay, dollars, okay? What they had to do is they had to go back and cut, when we said no tax increase, they had to go back and cut that out. Well, what they cut out was some of the things that I think is important. Not all of our roads are covered by VDOT, so they had to cut that out, and it's still cut out, okay? And there was something else, what was it that was pretty big?
The department capital outlays, we reduced
Yeah,
the department capital outlays as well.
so
Not completely.
I guess my point would be is you can reach a point when you're adding to your budget to where you're not going to have, after all this money's gone, we still have $3 million in lost revenues for the ARPA money. Okay, we still have that $3 million.
But those are all programmed though.
They're all-
That's all been
yeah,
earmarked, and we don't have
They're
that much money
earmarked,
that
yeah,
left.
they're earmarked. But when we could reach a point to where we've got these capital, and I realize that with government, most of the time that's borrowed money. We go out and borrow the money anyway. But I will add, though, there'll come a point when there probably won't be any money extra if we stay at the rate we're at now with operations, and that includes personnel, with the personnel, that we won't have those extra monies for the roads that's important that we pay.
So let me ask this question, and I'm just, like I said, I'm not trying to disagree with you. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to understand. How much money have we added? How much money extra do we have in our reserve fund, in addition to what we need to save?
It's in excess of $3 million.
Okay, so if we have an excess of $3 million, why aren't we using that excess that the taxpayers have paid us in tax money to do things like the roads? Why aren't we, if that is extra money that taxpayers have paid, if I'm paying taxes, right? So if I'm paying my personal property taxes, I don't want that money to sit in an account. I want that money to be used. So if there's a road that's messed up, why aren't we using that money on capital funds?
Well, first of all, we have to have a balanced budget.
Right.
Okay. And based on the numerous discussions we've had in the past, the original, if I can go back to your point, Ms. Quetch, about the tax increase, it was a tax levy increase based on inflation, but yet it was still a tax rate reduction. It was one of those opportunities, if you will, where you could let the constituents know that, yes, for some it would be a tax increase, but we're lowering the rate because we were trying to keep up with inflation. What's not sustainable is when you have an opportunity on the revenue side to keep up with inflation, but you elect not to do that. But your costs are going to continue to go up. And so with the materials and everything else that goes up, and personnel goes up as well, then you could have layoffs. But no one wants to see that either because we still want to be able to operate the town. So that was a decision that was made, not by us, but by y'all, because you don't want to raise taxes, and I totally understand that. I'm a taxpayer as well. But again, it didn't keep up with 20-something% inflation since the last assessment. And in fact, with the 19-cent rate, we've actually reduced our revenue, our tax levy, by $40-something thousand. And it's going to reduce again because we just moved some major properties off of the tax roll onto the nonprofit roll. And so we're not going to collect that either. So that's a reality. Okay. As far as using the fund, the general fund, we are, the $203,000 we're using it. But we have $1.8 million in grant projects. Okay, the value of $1.8 million that we're able to get by using $276,000. That's a pretty good return for capital projects that hopefully will enhance the town, benefit its citizens, and keep the town running forward.
And I think
So
we're doing a
not-
great job with the grants. I think.
So
that
were it
y'all
not
are
for
doing-
that,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have the projects, we wouldn't be taken out of the general fund. So like I said, we're just using that one thing, we'd be adding $73,000 to the general fund. But again, we cut out some capital things, we cut out the non-VDOT
Urban maintenance.
urban maintenance,
Type of-
okay? Because we had to balance. And I know that there's a position to be had on either side of non-departmental grants to other folks in town. That is not an operating expense. Yes, we do benefit by them bringing in tourism and whatnot, but it's a non-operating expense. So just, the grants and that, okay, that is over $525,000, okay, for grants and that amount.
And
So were it not for that, we could put our VDOT urban maintenance back in.
So how much is the VDOT urban maintenance that we took out?
it's
350
$350.
is what we
350,
took out.
the,
So if we get to it, and I've brought this up before, and I would very much like for us to have a prioritized list. If we get to halfway through our fiscal year and we have more revenues than we expected, then I would hope that we would have a prioritized list and we could say, let's take care of number one. Let's take care of number two.
Sure.
Because, I mean, you do a great job, but you're not a fortune teller. You can't say, we're going to have this amount of money on this day. But, we don't know. I mean, Barter Summer Show may sell like crazy, and we may have this huge tourism, boom this summer, and we may have all this extra revenue. And if we do, we need to have a plan for how we're going to spend it, I think.
correct, and see, the blacktop, once this gets cold, they don't make it anymore, you have to wait till the spring, and that'd be on the time that we could adjust to put the money back in for the non-urban maintenance roads. Because when we're doing the sewer project, they're digging up the roads and putting them back, but those funds only allow those roads to be patched. They won't allow them to be fully redone. And the roads, the Public Works has a criteria they use, but they want them to be done right and done the right way, so they look the right way, because you all get the phone calls if they're all chalked up and stuff like that.
So if at the end of this, after we pass a budget, then I think that's something that the next thing that the council should probably work on is making a list of those priorities, things that
Well, I
will
think
perhaps
they
remove.
normally do that during our retreat, which we'll probably have another one.
We do it in January, but that'll be plenty of time, because the asphalt, March, April, depends on the temperature
And by
range.
then you'll know, we'll have a good idea of where we are.
Yes.
Because I think that that's something important for us to consider.
Now, the one thing that, the reason that for the ultra conservative on the estimate with the budget is we had the other thing that was adjacent to town that has been on a pause. It'll get done, but it's not getting done in the timeline that I was expecting. And so we just really dialed back on everything in order to make sure that we have a conservative approach to it and make it happen. So, but yeah, it's there's a lot of different things happening, but we're just waiting on that, either the upper part of the trail or that thing to get finished, and then we should see a resumption in some of our activity. But like I said, by looking at the numbers, we've seen pretty robust activity across the board. All of our typical numbers are trending. Some aren't up as high as we wanted, but some are much higher than we wanted. So, but part of it just goes by doing what we do. Public Works, the crews out there, everybody kills it, and it looks amazing. And And we did hydroseed Veterans Park. The green wears off, but it will be wildflowers as soon as that stuff takes off, so. But, yeah, it's about all all the issues. Like I said, but on the non-urban maintenance, it's 350, but we can look at it in the spring, and then it'll give us a chance, because by then, they'll have a lot of their roads that they've dug up ready to get repaved. I know there's a couple of them that need to get redone, but you know, it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. Thankfully, the VDOT covers many of our roads already, so.
Let me say, I appreciate the very courteous discussion that we've had here today, exchanging ideas. I think that's very important. Each of us come into it with our own individual sensitivity, shall we say, to these issues. Some perhaps look at it more conservatively than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. If we didn't have some difference of opinion, we wouldn't need but one person on town council.
Sure, sure.
So this is good, and I appreciate it. And I'm listening to all these views as I sit here and formulate exactly where my sensitivity is on it. Mr. Troutman in particular, I appreciate your very direct approach and explanation concerning these things. And it makes a lot of sense, and I hear you. My sensitivity may be a little bit different in regards to, but still, I want you to know I appreciate that.
I appreciate y'all too.
Ms. Pillion, I appreciate your thoughts and ideas, and certainly Ms. Quesh over here. She's great with crunching these numbers and pointing these things out to us. But again, you know, I go back to what I said a little bit earlier. I don't think we need to have the savings to the extent perhaps that sometimes we have. But again, Donna always uses the word sustainability, and I think I'd probably use the word foreseeability, because we foresee the possibility in the future of having some difficulties with this budget and with the budget next year, and going forward with it. And that's what we're, at least personally, that's what I'm trying to warn everybody about. I see the train coming down the track, and I am concerned about that. So that's where I am.
And I'll get together a list of what Steve was talking about, what the different positions were and what comprised the differences. Because as you see this year, it's a 5% difference year to year. That includes the extra firemen, so or fire hours. So it's not just to better explain where the differences come from, because I don't like talking in percentages, because percentages are, you know, if it's 60 degrees today and 70 tomorrow, is it 13% hotter? I mean, you know, I don't like percentages, I like numbers. So I'll put that together for you and send it out.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Mike or Steve?
Just real quickly, go over the sewer.
Yes, sir.
The enterprise
Yes,
fund
sir.
as well. On the enterprise fund, if y'all recall, when the Davenport met with us, not this past January, but last January in 2024, they had recommended rate increases on our sewer service in order to sustain debt coverage for the tremendous amount of projects that we have on the table right now, as well as what's on the plan, on the CIP plan. So this budget does anticipate a 7% increase in sewer rates. Put that in context, I don't know what the average is, but I know for my sewer bill, it's typically about $35. So it'll be a couple of dollars more each month.
With the 7% increase.
With the 7%, right. And again, that was a recommendation. That does, based on our forecast for both revenue as well as our expenditure growth, as well as the debt service that's required for the current $21 million in projects, as well as the additional $22 million after that, so $43 million in total. That should sustain our debt service ratios for VRA purposes and maintain our credit rating for that. It does include the 4 major projects. That being said, it's highly unlikely that they're going to start and complete in the fiscal year, but we put those in there as a placeholder anyway, just so that we'll be able to track those, because we may have a little bit of expense on one project, and we'll have a little bit of revenue as we draw down on our bond for that. But it probably won't, with the exception of phase 1, we won't see those completed in the year. The personnel, we really only have one totally dedicated person for sewer billing purposes, but we do have allocated salaries from other folks in the town, myself included, and others in administration.
And what's it total? What's the total for the percentage? I don't have it in front of me. I know you gave it to me. but I don't see-
The percentage of the allocation?
Yeah, no, what's the total for the personnel from here that's charged to that enterprise fund?
Let's see if I have the. Don't have that.
I'm sorry, I thought it was broke out on your summary. I'm sorry.
Not on that one. It's probably about 200,000 roughly, I believe. Over 200. But I don't have that number exactly. The percentages are vary, amongst the people.
Depends on the personnel, what they're doing, and then like if you go into the treasurer's office, there's one person in particular who's fully funded out of that because she handles all of our sewer billing, and then incrementally different departments or different positions have percentages they oversee that.
Yeah, I can email that to you, Ms. Quich. I don't have it. Oh, you have it right there. Okay, that's just regular. Yeah, 179 is just the regular wages, and then we have to add up all the allocated other. I think I have it on the personnel summary sheets. Probably not in there. In excess of 200, but I'm not sure exact number. But I can get that to you.
Well, that's okay. I can figure it out.
Okay. Again, it does include the CIP for those 4 major projects, and it does include some new debt service for phase 1, as well as some debt service for the Southview pump station. That's plugged in there. It's highly unlikely that we'll have a debt payment on that particular project, but I went ahead and put it in the budget anyway, okay, just to make sure. With that in mind, we would be adding $423,000 to the sewer fund budget. And in this case, we do, Ms. Pillion, we do look to add to the sewer reserve budget, or the sewer reserve fund every year. And again, to maintain our credit rating, as well as to have, because it's so expensive to keep the enterprise fund and the sewer operating, we need to have those funds available.
In case there's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And for future debt service as well. We need to build that up.
Well, and yes, and I wasn't advocating, that we don't save any money at all. I know that we need to have
Oh, yeah.
reserves for a rainy day, because you never know what's going to happen.
For sure, yeah, no, since I got here 3 years ago, we've added, the 1.25, that was right at 250,000 my first year here, and that's fully funded, plus it's up to like 1.33, and the 5 is at 5.33, and then we have the roughly, give or take 4 million on top of that. So we've had really good performance, but it's just because while expenses have gone up, our revenues have gone up considerably as well. So, it all comes out in the wash. But,
Right.
if I had looked at 10 years ago and said, wow, this is where your budget would be, I'd be like, you're all crazy. But, if everything gets adjusted, because that's just how the economy works,
Yes.
so.
Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna ask the question, shall this proposal be rejected? If not, if the response is no, which I'm getting no, then we shall move on to the second reading on June the 3rd, 2025 at 10:45 a.m.
Thank you all
I'll call
very
this
much.
meeting adjourned.